The axe came down with a clean crack that split the pine log into two perfect halves, and Vincent Cross wiped the sweat from his brow despite the morning chill that hung over the Wyoming mountains in October of 1878. He had been awake since before dawn, same as every morning for the past 3 months, splitting kindling into neat piles before she woke. The fire had to be warm when Tessa Pritchard opened her eyes, had to chase away the cold that seeped through the cabin walls, had to make the rough-hewn room feel like something more than just shelter. She never started a day without warm fire, and Vincent would be damned if he let that change now. He stacked the split wood against the outer wall of the cabin and carried an armload inside, moving quiet as he could manage for a man of his size. 6'4", and built like he had been carved from the same mountains that surrounded them, Vincent had learned to make himself small in the mornings, learned to bank the coals and feed them kindling without letting the iron stove door clang, learned which floorboards creaked and which stayed silent. The fire caught quick, hungry flames licking at the dry wood, and he added larger pieces once it got going proper. Tessa still slept in the bed he had built for her when she first arrived. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink, one hand curled beneath her cheek. She looked peaceful now, nothing like the half-frozen, terrified woman who had stumbled into his camp 3 months back, leading a lame horse, and looking over her shoulder like the devil himself was giving chase. Vincent put the coffee on and went back outside to finish the wood. The sun was starting to break over the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the whole world look new. He had been living in these mountains for going on 7 years, trapping and hunting and keeping to himself, and he had thought he knew what his life was going to be. Then Tessa Pritchard had appeared like an answered prayer he had never thought to make, and everything he believed about solitude and safety had turned itself inside out. The coffee smell must have reached her because he heard movement inside, the soft pad of bare feet on wood floor. Vincent gathered up the last of the kindling and headed in to find her standing by the stove in her nightdress, in the wool shawl he had given her, her hands wrapped around a tin cup, her gray eyes watching him with that mix of gratitude and something else he could not quite name. "You are always up so early," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Mountain habit," Vincent replied, setting the wood down in the box beside the stove. "Coffee's hot, I can see that." She smiled, just a small curve of her lips, but it hit him square in the chest like it did every time. "Thank you for the fire. I do not know how I ever managed without one to wake up to." "Reckon you managed just fine," Vincent said, pouring himself coffee and trying not to stare at her. "You are tougher than you look. I had to be." The smile faded some, and she looked down into her cup. "My father made certain of that." Vincent knew bits and pieces of her story by now, learned over quiet evenings and careful conversations. Tessa had grown up in Green River, the town about 40 miles northwest of his mountain cabin, raised by a father who drank too much and a mother who had died when Tessa was barely 14. She had kept house for her father and her 2 older brothers, had learned to make a dollar stretch further than it had any right to go, had taught herself to read from old newspapers and a Bible her mother left behind. Then her father had decided she was old enough to marry and had promised her to Cyrus Blackthorne, a cattle rancher twice her age with a reputation for meanness and a first wife who had died under circumstances nobody talked about much. Tessa had other ideas. She had taken her mother's silver locket, the only thing of value she owned, and a horse from her father's small stable, and she had run. Blackthorne had come after her with 2 of his men. They had chased her for 3 days through rough country, and her horse had gone lame in the high country where the trees grew thick and the trails disappeared into rock and pine needle. She had been trying to lead the animal to water when she stumbled into Vincent's camp, more luck than design, and he had taken one look at her frightened face and made a decision that changed both their lives. He had sent the horse back down the mountain with a note tied to its saddle that said Tessa Pritchard died in a fall. May God have mercy on her soul. He had buried her traveling dress and bonnet in a shallow grave and marked it with stones. When Blackthorne's men came sniffing around 2 days later, Vincent had shown them the grave and told them the story cold and flat, his rifle in his hands and his face giving away nothing. They had believed him because men like Vincent Cross did not lie, not up in these mountains where a man's word was the only currency that mattered. Tessa had been dead to the world below for 3 months now, and Vincent had been keeping her alive with warm fires and hot coffee, and a protection that ran deeper than he had words for. "What are your plans for today?" Tessa asked, breaking into his thoughts. Got trips to check up on the North Ridge, Vincent said. Should be back before dark. You need anything before I go? More water would be good. And I was thinking I might try to make bread if you think the flour will stretch. Flour will stretch fine. I will bring the water. Vincent finished his coffee and set the cup down, reaching for his coat. The buckskin was worn soft with age and use, and it fit him like a second skin. He pulled on his hat, the wide brim shadowing his face, and picked up the water buckets. Vincent? Tessa's voice stopped him at the door. He turned back, and she was looking at him with those gray eyes that seemed to see right through to his bones. Be careful, up there. Always am, he said, and meant it. The creek ran fast and cold about 100 yards from the cabin, fed by snowmelt from higher up. Vincent filled both buckets and carried them back, his shoulders taking the weight easy. He had been doing hard work since he was old enough to hold an axe, first on his family's farm in Missouri, then in the war that had taken his father and both his brothers, then out here where the only thing that mattered was whether you were strong enough to survive. Tessa had started mixing the bread dough when he got back, her sleeves rolled up and flour dusting her forearms. She had changed into the split riding skirt and flannel shirt he had bought for her in a trading post 2 months back, clothes that fit the mountains better than the thin dress she had been wearing when she arrived. She looked like she belonged here now, like she had been made for this rough country and this simple life. Vincent watched her work for a moment, the economical movements of her hands, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating. Something warm and fierce expanded in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to the feelings he had been trying to keep locked down since about 2 weeks after she arrived. Water's by the stove, he said, rougher than he meant to. I will be back before supper. He left before she could say anything else, before he could do something foolish, like tell her that he thought about her every minute he was away from the cabin, that he had started measuring his days by her smiles and her laughter and the sound of her voice saying his name. Vincent Cross had survived 7 years alone in these mountains, had made it through the war when better men died, had built a life that asked nothing from nobody. He did not need complications. He did not need to fall in love with a woman who was supposed to be dead. The traps on the North Ridge had caught 2 rabbits and a marten, good haul for October. Vincent reset them all and checked the territory for signs of other trappers, but this high up he had the mountains mostly to himself. Most men preferred to work closer to the settlements, where they could trade easy and drink in saloons and pretend they were still civilized. Vincent had never seen the point. Civilization had not done much for him, except take away everyone he cared about and teach him that surviving meant keeping your distance. Except now there was Tessa, and distance was the last thing he wanted. He made it back to the cabin just as the sun started to drop behind the western peaks. The smell of fresh bread met him at the door, rich and yeasty, and his stomach growled in response. Tessa had the table set with the tin plates and cups he owned, and there was rabbit stew bubbling on the stove alongside the bread. You did not have to go to all this trouble, Vincent said, hanging up his coat and setting his rifle in the corner. It is no trouble. I like cooking for someone besides just myself. Tessa ladled stew into bowls and cut thick slices of the bread, steam rising from the golden crust. Besides, you do everything else. The least I can do is make sure we eat proper. They sat down to eat, and Vincent tried not to notice how domestic it all felt, how right. Like they were a real couple instead of a fugitive and the man who had helped her disappear. Like this cabin was a home instead of just a hiding place. This is good, he said around a mouthful of stew. Real good. My mother taught me. She said a woman who could not cook was a woman who would never keep a husband. Tessa's expression went complicated. Of course, she also said a woman should be obedient and grateful for whatever man would have her, so perhaps her advice was not all sound. Reckon your mother did not know you very well if she thought you would be obedient. Tessa laughed, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. No, I suppose she did not. My father certainly never expected me to run. I think he genuinely believed I would just accept being sold off to Cyrus Blackthorne like a piece of livestock. Good thing you are smarter than your father gave you credit for. Good thing I found you. Her voice went soft, and when Vincent looked up, she was watching him with an intensity that made his pulse kick up. I never properly thanked you, Vincent, for saving me, for keeping me safe, for all of this. No thanks needed. Yes, there is. You could have turned me away. Most men would have. Instead, you gave up your solitude and your safety, and you have been taking care of me for 3 months without asking for anything in return. That deserves thanks. Vincent set down his spoon, his throat tight. You being here, that is thanks enough. These mountains got real quiet after a while. Nice to have someone to talk to again. Is that all it is? Someone to talk to? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Vincent knew what she was asking, knew what he should say if he wanted to keep things simple, but he had never been much good at lying, especially not to those gray eyes. No, he said finally, that is not all it is. Tessa's breath caught, just a small hitch. But he heard it. What is it then? I think you know. I want to hear you say it. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, the dark strands falling past his shoulders. He had not cut it in more than a year, had let it grow out like the mountain men of old. And Tessa was always finding excuses to touch it, to tuck it behind his ear or brush it back from his face. He stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness that had settled over the mountains. I never planned on caring about anyone again, he said, his back still to her. Lost too many people, war took my whole family, saw friends die for causes that did not matter, watched good men bleed out in mud and smoke. Came up here to get away from all that, to build something that could not be taken from me. Then you showed up, half dead and desperate, and I knew I was in trouble. Why trouble? Because you made me want things I thought I was done wanting. Made me remember what it felt like to care whether someone else was warm and fed and safe. Made me start thinking about futures instead of just getting through another winter. He turned to face her, and the look on her face nearly undid him. You made me fall in love with you, Tessa Pritchard, and that is the most dangerous thing that has happened to me since I took a bullet at Shiloh. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, and crossed the room to him. She was a full foot shorter than him, had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, but there was nothing small about her in that moment. Then we are both in danger, she said quietly. Because I have been in love with you since the first morning I woke up to a warm fire and realized you had been taking care of me while I slept. Since you looked at me like I was a person instead of property. Since you made me feel safe for the first time in my entire life. Vincent cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms rough against her skin. Tessa, kiss me, Vincent. He did. He bent down and kissed her soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. But Tessa was not breakable, was not fragile, despite her size and her circumstances. She kissed him back with a fierceness that matched the mountains themselves, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. This changes things, good. I was tired of things staying the same. I mean it, Tessa. If we do this, if we make this real, there is no going back. You will be mine and I will be yours, and I will fight any man who tries to take you from me. I am already yours. I have been for weeks. I was just waiting for you to catch up. Vincent kissed her again, deeper this time, and lifted her up like she weighed nothing. She wrapped her legs around his waist and her arms around his neck, and he carried her to the bed he had built for her, the bed that would be theirs now. You are certain? He asked, setting her down on the edge of the mattress. Once we cross this line, I will not be able to let you go. I am certain. I have never been more certain of anything. She reached up and pulled him down to her. Love me, Vincent, please. So he did. He loved her with his hands and his mouth and his body, with a tenderness that surprised them both. He had been alone for so long, had forgotten what it felt like to be close to another person, to share breath and heartbeat and pleasure. Tessa gave herself to him completely, held nothing back, and when they finally came together it felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile country. Afterwards they lay tangled in the blankets, Tessa's head on Vincent's broad chest, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. The fire in the stove had burned down to coals, and the cabin was growing cold, but neither of them moved to do anything about it. I will need to split more kindling in the morning, Vincent said, running his fingers through her hair. I know, you always do. Tessa pressed a kiss to his collarbone. It is one of my favorite things about you. Splitting kindling, the way you take care of me, the way you have taken care of me from the very beginning. Most men would have demanded something in return by now. You just kept giving, kept making sure I was safe and warm and fed, and never asked for anything. I was asking, just in my own way, waiting for you to be ready. I am ready now. I am ready for all of it. For this life, for you, for whatever comes next. Vincent tightened his arm around her. Might not be easy. We are a long way from anywhere up here. Winters are hard. Supplies run thin. It gets lonely when the snow comes, and we cannot get down to the trading posts. I do not care about easy. I care about being with you. and I will never be lonely as long as you are here. I am not going anywhere." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the cold forgotten in the warmth they made together. And when Vincent woke before dawn the next morning, his first thought was not about checking traps or splitting wood. His first thought was about the woman sleeping beside him, about the way she had changed his life in the space of 3 months, about how he was going to spend the rest of his days, making sure she never regretted choosing him. He slipped out of bed careful and quiet, pulled on his pants and shirt, and went outside to split kindling in the pre-dawn dark. The axe felt good in his hands, the repetitive motion soothing. He worked until the pile was high enough to last through the day, then carried an armload inside and built up the fire in the stove. Tessa was awake when he turned around, propped up on one elbow, watching him with sleepy eyes and a smile that made his heart turn over. "Good morning," she said. "Morning. Fire will be warm in a minute." "I know, it always is." She held out a hand to him. "Come back to bed for a while." Vincent went, because he had never been able to deny her anything and because the traps could wait another hour. He climbed back under the blankets and pulled her close, and they stayed like that while the fire caught and the cabin warmed and the sun rose over the mountains outside. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm, one that felt natural as breathing. Vincent still woke early to split kindling and build the fire, still checked his traps and hunted and did the 100 other tasks that kept them alive in the high country. But now Tessa was part of everything, working beside him to cure meat and tan hides, to gather the last of the fall berries and dig up roots that would store through winter. They moved around each other like they had been doing it for years instead of months, anticipating needs and sharing work and building a life together piece by piece. November came in cold, with snow dusting the high peaks and frost turning the morning grass white and brittle. Vincent knew they only had a few more weeks before the heavy snows started, before the passes closed and they were trapped on the mountain until spring. He needed to make a run down to the trading post at Green River, needed to stock up on flour and coffee and ammunition and all the other things they could not make or grow themselves. "I am coming with you," Tessa said when he told her his plans. "Too dangerous. Someone might recognize you. No one will recognize me. I have been dead for 3 months, remember? And I cannot stay cooped up in this cabin forever, Vincent. I need to see other people, need to remember what civilization looks like, even if it is just a trading post and a few rough buildings." He wanted to argue, wanted to keep her safe on the mountain where no one could touch her. But he also understood the need for human contact beyond just each other, understood that she was going stir crazy with just him in the mountains for company. "We go in quick, get what we need, and leave," he said finally. "You stay close to me the whole time, and if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Agreed?" "Agreed." They set out 2 days later, both of them on the sturdy bay gelding Vincent kept for trips down to the settlements. Tessa sat in front of him, nestled against his chest, and Vincent kept one arm around her waist while the other held the reins. The trail down from the high country was steep and rocky, winding through pine forests and across creeks swollen with snowmelt. But the horse was sure-footed, and Vincent knew every inch of the route. Green River sprawled along the banks of the river it was named for, a rough collection of buildings that served the trappers and ranchers and drifters who made their way through this part of Wyoming territory. The trading post sat at the center of town, a long, low building that sold everything from flour to firearms to whiskey that would strip paint off a barn door. Vincent tied the horse outside and helped Tessa down, keeping her close as they went inside. The proprietor, a weathered man named Sam Hutchins, looked up from his ledger and nodded a greeting. "Vincent Cross. Been a while. Been busy? Need supplies for winter? I can fix you up. Flour, coffee, salt, anything else? Ammunition for the rifle, needles and thread if you got them. Sugar if the price is not robbery." Sam grinned. "Everything is robbery out here, you know that." His eyes slid to Tessa, curious. "Who is your friend, my wife?" Vincent said, the lie coming easy. "Teresa, pleased to meet you, madam." Did not know Vincent had gone and gotten himself hitched. "Recent development," Tessa said, her voice calm and steady. "We are still adjusting to mountain life." They spent an hour in the trading post, gathering supplies and packing them into the canvas bags Vincent had brought. Sam Hutchins was a talker, wanted to catch Vincent up on all the gossip from the past few months. A new family had settled south of town. A pack of wolves had been harassing the cattle ranches, and Cyrus Blackthorne was still looking for any trace of his runaway bride, convinced she could not have just vanished into thin air. Vincent felt Tessa tense beside him at the mention of Blackthorn's name, and he put a hand on her back, steady and reassuring. "Heard she died," Vincent said carefully. "Heard her horse came back lame and they found a grave up in the high country." "That is what the story is," Sam agreed. "But Blackthorn does not believe it. Keep sending men up into the mountains, poking around. You see anyone while you are up there?" "Just me and the wildlife. Anyone comes onto my territory, I will run them off." "You do that." Sam tallied up the supplies and named a price that made Vincent wince, but was not completely unreasonable. He paid in the coins and small nuggets of gold he had saved from his trapping, and then they were outside, loading the supplies onto the horse. "We should leave," Tessa whispered, "now." Vincent was inclined to agree. But as he turned to untie the horse, 3 men came around the corner of the trading post, and his blood went cold. He recognized the one in the lead, a hard-eyed man named Pike who worked for Cyrus Blackthorn. The other 2 were ranch hands, muscle hired to do whatever Blackthorn needed doing. "Well now," Pike said, his gaze fixing on Tessa. "Who do we have here, my wife?" Vincent said flatly. "And we are leaving. Your wife." Pike stepped closer, studying Tessa's face. "Funny thing. She looks a lot like a girl who went missing a few months back, Tessa Pritchard. You remember her?" "Never met her. You sure about that?" "Because I could swear this is her." Pike reached for Tessa's arm and Vincent moved without thinking. He grabbed Pike's wrist and twisted, forcing the man to his knees, and in the same motion he pulled his knife from his belt and held it to Pike's throat. "Do not touch her," Vincent said, his voice deadly calm. "Do not even look at her. We are getting on our horse and leaving, and you are going to let us, understood?" Pike's face had gone white, but he managed a nod. The other 2 men had their hands on their guns, but nobody was foolish enough to draw with Vincent's knife at their friend's throat. Vincent released Pike and backed toward the horse, keeping himself between the men and Tessa. He helped her mount and swung up behind her, taking the reins and turning the horse toward the trail out of town. "Blackthorn is going to hear about this," Pike shouted after them, climbing to his feet. "He is going to come for you, Cross. Let him try." Vincent called back, and then they were moving, the horses' hooves kicking up dust as they left Green River behind. They did not speak until they were miles out of town, climbing back into the high country. Tessa was shaking, her hands clenched tight on the saddle, and Vincent held her closer, murmuring reassurances. "I am sorry," she said finally. "I am so sorry, Vincent. I should not have insisted on coming. Now they know I am alive, and they know you have been hiding me, and Blackthorn is going to come after us. Let him come. I can handle Cyrus Blackthorn. He has money and men and influence. What do we have? We have these mountains, and up here, that is all we need." Vincent urged the horse faster, wanting to put as much distance between them and the town as possible. "He cannot reach us once the snow comes. Passes will be closed until spring, and by then we will have figured out what to do." "Run again, you mean?" "That is all I ever do. Run from my father, run from Blackthorn, run from anyone who wants to control me. This is not running. This is standing ground on territory that is mine. Blackthorn has no power up here. The law has no power up here. It is just us and what we can defend, and I promise you, Tessa, I will defend us." She twisted in the saddle to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. "Why? Why are you doing all this for me? You could have let me go, could have told them where I was. Your life would be so much simpler. I do not want simple. I want you." Vincent kissed her forehead, gentle despite the urgency humming through him. "I love you. That means something to me. It means everything to me, and I am not going to let anyone take you away." They made it back to the cabin as the sun was setting, both of them tense and watching the trail behind them. But no one followed. Not that day, and not the next, and not the week after that. The snows came early and hard, covering their tracks and burying the trails in white, and Vincent breathed a little easier knowing that Blackthorn's men could not reach them until spring. They settled into winter routines, holed up in the cabin with their supplies and each other. Vincent still split kindling every morning before Tessa woke, still made sure the fire was warm and the coffee was hot. They cooked together and read aloud from the few books Vincent owned and made love under piles of blankets while the wind howled outside. It was the hardest winter Vincent had ever spent in the mountains, and also the sweetest. "Teach me to shoot," Tessa said one morning in late December. They were sitting by the fire, both of them drinking coffee, and the request came out of nowhere. "Why?" "Because if Blackthorn comes when spring breaks, I want to be able to defend myself. I do not want to be helpless. I do not want you to have to protect me alone." Vincent studied her face, seeing the determination there. "All right, soon as the weather clears, we will start. He kept his word. On the first day of January in 1879, when the sun came out and melted some of the snow, Vincent took Tessa outside with his rifle and showed her how to load and aim and fire. She was a natural, steady-handed and focused, and by the end of the week she could hit a target at 50 yards more often than not. "Good," Vincent said, watching her sight down the barrel. "Real good. Now try for that tree, the one with the split trunk." Tessa fired, and bark exploded from the tree right where she had been aiming. She lowered the rifle and grinned at him, flushed with success and cold air. "How was that?" "Perfect. You are a hell of a shot, Tessa Pritchard." "Tessa Cross," she corrected. "We said we were married, remember? I like the sound of it." Vincent's heart kicked in his chest. "Tessa Cross, yeah. I like it too. Think we could make it real? Is there a preacher anywhere around here?" "Closest one is in Green River, and we cannot go back there." "Then we will marry ourselves." Tessa set the rifle down and came to him, taking both his hands in hers. "Right here, right now. I promise to love you and stay with you for as long as I live. To be your wife in every way that matters. To stand beside you and fight with you and build a life with you. That is my vow, Vincent Cross." Vincent felt his throat go tight. He squeezed her hands and looked into her eyes. Those clear gray eyes that saw right through him. "I promise to love you and protect you and keep you safe. To split kindling every morning so you wake up to a warm fire. To give you everything I am and everything I have. To be your husband in every way that matters. That is my vow, Tessa Pritchard, who will be Tessa Cross." "We are married." "We are married," Vincent echoed, and he kissed her there in the snow with the mountains as their witnesses, and it felt more binding than any ceremony in any church. The winter deepened and then began to break. February brought warmer days and the first signs of melt. March came in wet and muddy, the creeks running high and fast. And in early April, when the passes were just starting to clear, Vincent heard the sound of horses coming up the mountain. He grabbed his rifle and went to the door, motioning for Tessa to stay inside. 3 riders were making their way up the trail, moving slow through the mud and snow. Vincent recognized the lead horse, a big black stallion that could only belong to one man. Cyrus Blackthorne had come calling. Vincent stepped outside and levered around into the rifle's chamber, the sound loud in the quiet morning. The riders stopped about 50 yards out, still mounted, and Blackthorne raised a hand in a parody of a friendly greeting. "Vincent Cross. Mind if we come up and talk? State your business from there. You know my business. You have something that belongs to me. I do not have anything that belongs to you. Tessa Pritchard belongs to me. Her father promised her, and I paid good money. You are harboring my property." "Tessa Pritchard is dead," Vincent said coldly. "You saw the grave yourself. I saw a pile of rocks and a story that does not add up." Blackthorne dismounted and took a few steps forward, his hands carefully away from his guns. He was a big man, thick through the middle, with cold eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "I know she is up here, Cross. My men saw her in town. All I want is what is mine. Give her back and there will be no trouble. And if I do not, then there will be considerable trouble. I brought 2 men with me today, but I can bring 20, 30, however many it takes to bring her down. You cannot win this. Maybe not. But I can make it cost you. And I can promise that if you try to take her, you will be the first to die." Blackthorne's expression hardened. "You would throw your life away for a woman you barely know? For someone else's runaway bride? She is not your bride. She is my wife. And I am not throwing anything away. I am defending what is mine, your wife." Blackthorne laughed, a harsh sound. "You marry her properly, with a preacher and witnesses?" "We married ourselves. That is legal enough in the territories. Legal enough." Blackthorne spat into the mud. "You are a fool, Cross, but I will give you one more chance. Send her out and I will let you live. Keep her and I will burn your cabin to the ground with both of you inside. You have until tomorrow to decide." He turned and walked back to his horse, mounting up with the careful movements of a man who was not as young as he used to be. The 3 riders turned and headed back down the mountain, and Vincent watched them until they disappeared into the trees. Tessa came out as soon as they were gone, the rifle in her hands. "What are we going to do?" "We are going to get ready for a fight." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Vincent showed Tessa how to barricade the cabin, how to create firing positions at the windows, how to conserve ammunition and make every shot count. He checked and rechecked his weapons, cleaned and loaded the extra rifle he had traded for 2 years back, set out ammunition in easy reach. When night fell, they ate a cold supper and tried to rest, but neither of them slept much. Tessa lay curled against Vincent's side, her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. I am not afraid of dying, she said quietly. I am afraid of losing you. You are not going to lose me. We are both going to survive this, and we are going to keep living the life we built together. I promise you that, Tessa. You cannot promise something like that. Watch me. They came at dawn, just as Vincent had expected. Not 3 riders this time, but closer to 15, all of them armed and spreading out to surround the cabin. Vincent counted them from the window, recognizing a few faces from town and the ranches. Blackthorn was there in the center, sitting his horse like a general commanding an army. Cross, Blackthorn shouted. Last chance. Send her out. Vincent did not bother responding. He aimed carefully and fired, the bullet kicking up dirt 2 feet in front of Blackthorn's horse. The animal reared, and the rancher nearly fell, and then chaos erupted. The men opened fire on the cabin, bullets smacking into the log walls and shattering one of the windows. Vincent and Tessa fired back, methodical and careful, making each shot count. 2 men went down in the first minute, one clutching his shoulder and the other not moving at all. The rest scattered, looking for cover. The fight went on for an hour, then 2. Vincent moved from window to window, firing and reloading, watching for patterns. Tessa held the back of the cabin, keeping anyone from sneaking up on them from behind. She was calm and steady, everything he had taught her coming through when it mattered most. But they were outnumbered, and eventually they would run out of ammunition. Vincent knew it, and Blackthorn knew it too. The rancher was keeping his distance now, letting his men do the work, content to wait them out. Then Vincent heard something that changed everything. Horses, more horses, coming up the trail from a different direction. He risked a look and felt hope surge through him. Sam Hutchins from the trading post was riding in with 6 men behind him, all of them armed. Blackthorn, Sam shouted. This ends now. The rancher turned, his face going dark with rage. This is not your business, Hutchins. It became my business when you brought an army onto mountain territory to harass a man who never did anything but try to live peaceful. Vincent Cross is one of ours. You want him, you go through us. The men with Sam spread out, rifles ready, and suddenly the numbers were a lot more even. Blackthorn looked from Sam to the cabin to his own men, calculating odds and costs. Vincent could see the moment he decided it was not worth it. This is not over. Blackthorn spat. Yes, it is, Sam said calmly. Tessa Pritchard is dead. You saw the grave. Whatever woman Vincent married, she is not your property, and she never was. Now get off this mountain before I decide you need arresting for attempted murder. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Blackthorn jerked his reins and turned his horse, and his men followed. They rode down the mountain in a ragged line, leaving their dead and wounded behind, and Vincent felt the tension drain out of him all at once. Sam dismounted and walked up to the cabin, and Vincent opened the door to meet him. The 2 men clasped hands, and Vincent felt gratitude rise up so strong he almost could not speak. Why? He managed. Because I knew what you were doing when you brought that girl into my trading post and called her your wife. And because Cyrus Blackthorn is a mean son of a bitch who had no right to buy himself a woman like she was livestock. Figured you could use some help setting things straight. Sam looked past Vincent to where Tessa stood, pale but steady. Madam, thank you, Tessa said, her voice shaking. Thank you so much, no thanks needed. You 2 just live quiet and peaceful, and that will be thanks enough. Sam tipped his hat and turned to go, rounding up his men. Anyone asks, Vincent Cross's wife is named Teresa. She is from back east and she never had anything to do with Tessa Pritchard. You got that? Got it, Vincent said. They watched Sam and his men ride away, the silence settling over the mountain like a blessing. Vincent pulled Tessa into his arms and held her tight, feeling her shake with relief and spent fear. It is over, he said into her hair. It is really over. Because of you, because you fought for me, because you made people believe I was worth fighting for. You are worth everything. Vincent pulled back to look at her face, to see the tears streaming down her cheeks. You are worth every risk and every fight and every minute I have left. Do you understand that? I am starting to. She kissed him, salt and sweetness, and Vincent kissed her back with everything he had. They spent the next week cleaning up the aftermath of the fight, repairing the damage to the cabin, burying the man who had died, and tending the wounded one until he could be moved down to Green River. Word spread through the mountain communities about what had happened, and the consensus was clear. Vincent Cross had defended his home and his wife, and that was his right. Cyrus Blackthorn had overstepped, and if he wanted to keep his reputation and his standing, he would let the matter drop. Blackthorn, faced with the reality that he had lost and that pursuing Tessa would cost him more than she was worth, did exactly that. He went back to his ranch and his cattle and found himself another young woman to intimidate into marriage, one with no family to mourn her and no mountain man to defend her. Vincent heard about it and felt sick, but there was nothing he could do except make sure his own wife stayed safe. Spring gave way to summer, and life settled into the rhythms. Vincent had always known, but with Tessa beside him now. They tended the garden she planted, fished the streams, hunted and trapped, and gathered the bounty the mountains provided. Tessa learned to tan hides and make jerky and do the 100 other tasks that came with mountain living. And she did them all with a competence that made Vincent fall in love with her more every day. In June, she told him she was pregnant. They were sitting outside the cabin in the long twilight, watching the stars come out, and Tessa took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "There is a baby," she said simply. "Our baby." Vincent felt the world tilt. He had never let himself think about children, had never imagined he would have a family of his own after losing everyone in the war. But now, with Tessa's hand over his and her eyes shining in the starlight, he could not imagine anything he wanted more. "You are certain as I can be. I have missed my monthly twice now, and I am sick every morning. It is a baby, Vincent, a baby." He said it like a prayer, like a promise. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. Vincent pulled her into his lap and held her close, his hand still on her belly, protecting the life growing there. "You have given me everything, Tessa. A reason to live, a future to look forward to, and now a family. I do not have words for what that means to me. You do not need words. You show me every morning when you split kindling before I wake up, when you make sure the fire is warm and the coffee is hot, when you look at me like I am the most precious thing in your world. That is all the words I need." The baby came in February of 1880, born in the cabin with only Vincent there to help deliver. It was the longest and most terrifying night of Vincent's life, but when he finally held his son in his arms, red-faced and squalling and perfect, he understood why people talked about miracles. "What should we name him?" Tessa asked, exhausted but smiling from the bed. "You pick. You did all the hard work. Samuel, after Sam Hutchins who helped save us. Samuel Cross. Samuel Cross." Vincent looked down at his son, at the tiny face and waving fists. "Welcome to the mountains, Sam. You are going to love it here." They raised Samuel in the high country, teaching him to walk on mountain trails and swim in cold streams and respect the wildness around them. Vincent showed him how to split kindling when he was barely 4 years old, letting the boy hold the axe under careful supervision, teaching him the rhythms of mountain life. 2 years after Samuel came a daughter they named Mary, and then 2 years after that another son they called Thomas. The cabin expanded, growing new rooms to hold the growing family, and Vincent's trap lines extended to support them all. But every morning, no matter how many children were sleeping, no matter how chaotic the household, Vincent woke before dawn and split kindling and built up the fire. It was his ritual, his way of making sure Tessa never started a day without warmth. "You are still doing it," Tessa said one morning, coming out to find him splitting wood. She was older now, in her 30s, with threads of silver in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. But to Vincent, she was exactly as beautiful as the day she had stumbled into his camp, desperate and afraid. "After all these years, you are still making sure I wake up to a warm fire." "Always will," Vincent said, swinging the axe. "It is how I tell you I love you. I know. I have always known." She came to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, her head against his broad back. "Do you ever regret it, giving up your solitude for a wife and 3 loud children in a life that is so much more complicated than what you had before?" "Never. Not once. Not for a single second." Vincent set down the axe and turned to pull her into his arms. "You gave me everything that matters, Tessa. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning and keep going. Before you, I was just surviving. With you, I am living. Good, because I am not going anywhere. Neither am I." They stood like that in the pre-dawn dark, holding each other, while inside the cabin their children slept, and the fire Vincent had built warmed the rooms. The mountains rose around them, vast and wild and beautiful, and Vincent Cross knew he had finally found the place he was meant to be. The years passed in the way they do when life is good, fast and slow all at once. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, learning to trap and hunt and survive in the high country. Mary turned out to have her mother's determination and her father's skill with a rifle, a combination that served her well. Thomas was the quiet one, always reading when he could get books from the trading post, always asking questions about the world beyond the mountains. Vincent aged into his 40s and then his 50s, his dark hair going gray, his body weathering like the mountains themselves. But he was still strong, still capable, still splitting kindling every morning before Tessa woke. It was the promise he had made to himself that first winter, the way he proved his love every single day. Tessa aged beside him, the girl who had run from a forced marriage, becoming a woman who knew her own strength, a mother who raised her children to be brave and kind and free. She never regretted choosing Vincent, never looked back at the life she had left behind in Green River. This was her home now, these mountains and this man and this family they had built from nothing. In the winter of 1895, when Vincent was 53 and Tessa was 45, they stood on the porch of their cabin and watched their children ride down the mountain. Samuel was heading to Green River to trade the winter furs. Mary was going with him, planning to visit friends and maybe, just maybe, find a man worth marrying. Thomas had announced his intention to go east to school, to get an education and see the world beyond Wyoming. "They are leaving us," Tessa said, leaning against Vincent's side. "They are living the lives we gave them the freedom to live. That is all we ever wanted." "I know, but it makes the cabin feel very empty." Vincent wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Not empty, just back to where we started. You and me in the mountains. And the warm fire every morning." "And the warm fire every morning," Vincent agreed. They watched their children disappear into the trees, and then they turned and went back into the cabin together. Vincent added wood to the fire, Tessa put coffee on, and they sat down at the table they had eaten at for 16 years. "Tell me something," Tessa said, reaching across to take his hand. "If you could go back to the day I stumbled into your camp, knowing everything that would happen, would you still help me?" "Without question, even knowing it would bring Blackthorn and his men, even knowing you would have to fight to keep me, especially knowing that. You were worth fighting for then, and you are worth fighting for now. You will always be worth it, Tessa." She smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. "I love you, Vincent Cross. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." They spent that winter alone together, rediscovering the quiet rhythms of life without children underfoot. Samuel came back in spring, with news that he had met a woman and was planning to marry. Mary sent a letter announcing she was engaged to a rancher's son, and would be married in the summer. Thomas wrote from Colorado, where he had started school, full of excitement about his studies and the future he was building. "We did good," Vincent said, reading the letters aloud to Tessa. "They are all happy, all making their own way. We did good, we did," Tessa agreed. "And now we get to grow old together in peace, just like we always planned." And they did. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren who came to visit and learn the mountains from their grandfather, bringing gray hair and slower steps, but never diminishing the love that had started with a woman running for her life and a man who chose to save her. Vincent split kindling every morning well into his 70s, his shoulders still broad enough to swing the axe, his dedication unchanged by time or age. On a morning in early spring of 1910, when Vincent was 68 and Tessa was 60, he woke before dawn as always and started to get out of bed to do his morning work. But Tessa caught his hand and pulled him back down. "Stay," she said. "Just for this morning, stay with me." "The fire," Vincent protested. "Will wait, or I will build it myself. Just this once, I want you here when I wake up properly. I want to watch the sunrise with you instead of seeing you already working when I open my eyes." Vincent settled back against the pillows and pulled her close. They lay like that in the growing light, comfortable silence between them, years of love and shared life making words unnecessary. "I never thanked you properly," Tessa said eventually. "For what?" "For the kindling. For every single morning for 31 years. For making sure I always woke up to warmth. You thank me every day just by being here, by choosing me, by building this life with me. I would choose you again. Every time, in every life, I would choose you." "Good thing," Vincent said, kissing the top of her head. The sun came up over the eastern peaks, painting the cabin walls in shades of gold and pink. Vincent held his wife and watched the light change and felt grateful for every moment, every choice. Every morning he had woken up and split kindling so she would be warm. That afternoon he went back to his routine, because some promises were meant to be kept forever. He split wood and built fires and took care of the woman he loved, and he did it for years more, until his body finally gave out in his 76th winter, and he died peacefully in his sleep with Tessa beside him. She mourned him deeply but without regret, because they had lived a full life together, had raised children and loved each other fiercely, and built something lasting in the wild mountains of Wyoming. And every morning for the rest of her own life, Tessa woke to find the fire already warm in the stove. Built from the kindling, Samuel or Mary or Thomas had split before she woke, carrying on their father's tradition. When Tessa finally died at 79, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her last thought was of Vincent, of the mountain man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had split kindling every single morning so she would never face the cold alone. And in her final moment, she could swear she felt his presence beside her, could hear his voice saying what he had told her so many times over their years together. "I love you, always will. You made me live instead of just survive. And I will be grateful for that until the end of time." The cabin still stands on that Wyoming mountain, weathered by over a century of seasons but solid as the day Vincent Cross built it. Hikers sometimes stumble across it and wonder about the people who lived there, about the life they made in such a remote and beautiful place. If they look carefully, they can still see the marks of an axe on the old woodpile, can still imagine a tall, broad-shouldered man splitting kindling in the pre-dawn dark, building warmth for the woman he loved. And if the light is just right, if the morning is quiet enough, they might almost hear the echo of promises kept and love that lasted, of two people who found each other in the Wild West and built something that time itself could not diminish. A story of split kindling and warm fires and a mountain man who understood that the truest way to say "I love you" was not with words but with actions, repeated faithfully every single morning for a lifetime. That is how their story ends. Not with tragedy or drama, but with the simple, profound beauty of promises kept and love that endured. Vincent Cross and Tessa Pritchard, who became Tessa Cross, lived and loved and raised a family in the Wyoming mountains, and they did it together, one warm morning at a time. And in the end, that was everything they had ever wanted, everything they had ever needed, everything that mattered. Their story became legend in the mountain communities, passed down through generations as an example of what real love looked like. How a man had risked everything to save a woman he did not know, how she had chosen freedom and him over security and tradition, how they had defended their right to be together against all odds, how every morning for over 3 decades he split kindling before she woke because she never started a day without warm fire, and he made sure she never had to. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried pieces of Vincent and Tessa forward into the 20th century. Some stayed in the mountains, keeping the old ways alive. Others went to cities and built different lives, but they all carried the story with them, told their own children about the mountain man and the runaway bride who had loved each other with a fierceness that shaped the family for generations to come. Samuel Cross became a respected trapper and guide, known throughout Wyoming for his skill and his honesty. He married a woman named Claire and had 5 children of his own, teaching them all to respect the mountains and to love with the kind of devotion his father had shown his mother. When he was old, his grandchildren would ask him to tell them about Vincent and Tessa, and Samuel would smile and begin the same way every time. "My father," he would say, "was the strongest man I ever knew, not just in his body, though he could split a cord of wood faster than any man alive. Strong in his heart, in his commitment, in the way he loved my mother. Every single morning he woke before dawn and split kindling so she would have a warm fire when she opened her eyes. Rain, snow, sickness, old age, nothing stopped him. That was love. That was what it meant to truly care for someone." Mary Cross married her rancher's son and had 3 daughters who grew up tough and capable, women who knew their worth and refused to accept less than they deserved. She taught them about their grandmother Tessa, about the courage it took to run from a life you did not want and build something better, about how sometimes the right choice was the hardest one, but it was still right. Thomas Cross got his education and became a teacher, spending his life helping other people learn and grow. He never married, but he loved deeply in his own way, giving everything to his students and his books and the ideas that fascinated him. When people asked if he ever regretted not having a family of his own, he would shake his head and talk about the family he came from, about parents who had shown him what dedication looked like. The years turned to decades, the 20th century bringing changes that would have astonished Vincent and Tessa. Automobiles replaced horses, electric lights replaced oil lamps. The Wild West became something people romanticized instead of lived. But up in the mountains, some things stayed the same. The cabin endured, the stories persisted, and every winter, someone in the Cross family would make the trek up to the high country to check on the old homestead, to remember where they came from, to feel close to the man and woman who started it all. In 1978, exactly 100 years after Vincent and Tessa first met, the family organized a gathering at the cabin. Over 50 descendants made the trip, spanning 4 generations, from great-great-grandchildren who were just learning to walk to elderly folks who remembered meeting Tessa before she died. They spent a weekend together, sharing stories and laughter and memories, keeping the connection alive. On the final morning, just before dawn, the oldest member of the family, a man named Vincent Cross III, who was 78 years old, went outside with an axe. His grandchildren and great-grandchildren followed, curious and quiet in the pre-dawn dark. And there, in front of the cabin his great-grandfather had built, Vincent III began to split kindling. The rhythmic sound of the axe echoed through the morning, the same sound that had echoed every morning for over 30 years when the first Vincent Cross lived. When the pile was high enough, Vincent III carried an armload inside and built up the fire in the old stove that somehow, miraculously, still worked. The flames caught and grew, pushing back the cold, warming the cabin. "Why?" one of the youngest great-great-grandchildren asked. "Why did you do that?" "Because," Vincent III said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is how we remember. This is how we honor them. Your great-great-great-grandfather split kindling every morning for your great-great-great-grandmother because she never started a day without warm fire. He did it because he loved her, because taking care of her mattered more than sleep or comfort or his own needs. And we do it now to remember that kind of love, to keep it alive, to make sure nobody forgets what they built together." The child nodded solemnly, not entirely understanding but sensing the importance. And when that child grew up and had children of their own, they would tell them the story. About the mountain man who saved the runaway bride, who loved her so completely that he split kindling every morning for over 3 decades, who built a life and a family and a legacy that would endure long after both of them were gone. That is the power of true love, the kind that shows itself in actions instead of words, in consistent daily choices instead of grand gestures. Vincent Cross loved Tessa Pritchard from the moment he chose to help her, and he proved it every single day for the rest of his life. And Tessa loved him back just as fiercely, choosing him over safety, over expectations, over everything she had been taught she was supposed to want. They were not perfect people. They had arguments and hard days, and moments when the mountain life felt too harsh and unforgiving. But they never stopped choosing each other, never stopped working to make their relationship strong, never stopped showing up for each other in the small crucial ways that matter most. The split kindling was just wood, the warm fire just heat. But what they represented was everything. Care, dedication, love made tangible, a promise kept every single morning without fail. And that was worth more than all the grand romantic declarations in the world. So the story ends not with their deaths, but with their legacy, with the family they created and the example they set, and the love that rippled forward through time. Ends with the understanding that the best stories are not the ones with the most dramatic moments, but the ones that show us what it means to love well, to commit fully, to build something that lasts. Vincent Cross and Tessa Pritchard did exactly that. They built a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that lasted generations, and a story that would be told for as long as anyone remembered the Wild West and the mountain man who split kindling every morning so his beloved wife would never start a day without warm fire. That was their story, simple and profound, hard-won and beautiful. And in the end, it was absolutely everything.